We're all think alike, no one thinks very much. Walter Lippmann. You've seen it, you've heard it, maybe you've even reposted it. A carousel post that says healing isn't linear, a podcast clip that whispers protect your peace, or a tweet with a black background that reads if they wanted to, they would. It feels deep, it sounds wise, but something in you still feels empty after consuming it. Why? Because in today's culture of self-awareness, what we're calling depth is often just decor. You're drowning in content that claims to free you, but somehow still leaves you stuck. This isn't your fault, it's a system, a spiritual economy that profits off half-truths, emotional sound bites, and aesthetic trauma. And for the modern American man, especially one who's been hurt, lost, or trying to find solid ground, it's deadly. Because when you're searching for real answers, and all you're given is digestible hollow comfort, you don't get better. You become addicted to language that sounds like healing but reinforces your passivity. So here's the truth we're going to dig into. Fake depth isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. It keeps you wounded but makes you feel wise. It comforts your ego while ignoring your shadow. And worst of all, it convinces you that you're doing the work when all you're doing is scrolling through someone else's performance. If you've ever asked, why does all this self-help content feel the same? Why do I still feel numb even though I'm learning so much? What is real depth? What does real transformation cost? Then this is not just a video, it's your interruption. Let's go deeper than what's trending. Let's go somewhere you can't fake. Let's go where you actually change. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Today, that anything looks a lot like an Instagram quote with beige fonts over a misty background. Let's get something straight, a language is powerful. But when language becomes a substitute for experience, for pain, for work, that's when it becomes poison. In Jungian psychology, we face what he called the shadow, the disowned parts of the psyche. The parts we were told are too much, too angry, too vulnerable, too needy. To integrate the shadow isn't to say I accept myself, it's to actually face, feel, and reconcile with the impulses and histories you spent your life avoiding. But on social media, we've aestheticized the shadow. You see it in every dark feminine carousel. You hear it in every embrace your inner beast TikTok voiceover. It's not integration, it's cosplay. And Nietzsche saw this coming. He warned us of the last man, a creature of society who avoids great suffering, avoids great risk, and clings to comfort disguised as meaning. The last man says things like, everything happens for a reason. This too shall pass. They weren't meant for you. He believes he's wise, but he's numb. Nietzsche didn't want us to avoid suffering. He wanted us to descend into it consciously, to use it, to forge from it a stronger will. Real growth is anti-aesthetic. It's messy, contradictory, nonlinear, boring at times, ugly at others. But fake depth packages this chaos into a smooth, marketable identity. I'm healing. I've done the work. I'm aligned with my higher self. Meanwhile, their nervous system is still dysregulated, their boundaries still collapse, and their decisions still dictated by fear. Fake depth sounds like healing, but feels like sedation. And that's not accidental, it's cultural. We've created a society where performance is praised more than embodiment, where knowing the terms narcissist, shadow, self-worth is seen as more important than living the truth they represent. That's why it's easier to repost quotes than to write your own journal. Easier to follow trauma coaches than to go no contact with your own toxic patterns. The illusion of wisdom has replaced the journey toward it. And men, especially men in crisis, are especially vulnerable to this. Because when you're hurting and someone offers you poetic language that makes the pain sound profound, you feel understood. But feeling understood isn't the same as being healed. Let's stop mistaking philosophy for therapy. Let's stop worshiping words that don't demand action. Let's stop calling awareness the destination when it was always meant to be the start. There's a moment when self-awareness stops being a tool for change and becomes a costume. In the world of reels, carousels, and wellness brands, healing has become a lifestyle label. Something to signal, something to monetize, something to wear. We've turned inner work into outer branding. You've seen it. Curated soft life routines. Hashtags like no shadow work under a latte. People announcing boundaries not with actions but with pastel infographics. Healing has become content. But here's the problem. Healing is not content, it's confrontation. And real confrontation isn't algorithm friendly. It's not beautiful. It doesn't fit in 90 seconds. It can't be edited with lo-fi beats and a soft filter. Carl Jung believed that transformation involved integration of the opposites, bringing unconscious material into consciousness. That means the rage, the fear, the dependency, the shame, the numbness. Not the quote about it, not the cute t-shirt that says self-aware. Real growth looks like trembling, crying, saying things you regret, owning them, repairing, failing, beginning again. But in the culture of fake depth, all of that is skipped. And what's left is a hollow identity. I'm healing, I'm setting boundaries, I'm unlearning. But nothing changes. The nervous system is still activated, the same patterns repeat, the same avoidance continues. Because what's been adopted is not transformation, it's a persona of transformation. And that's incredibly seductive for men who are told that masculinity is now toxic, that power is dangerous, that control is bad. So we replace those things with gentle language, spiritual tones, compassionate detachment. But we don't feel more alive, we feel more ghost-like. Because if you turn your pain into a product, you'll stop yourself from feeling it. And if you don't feel it, you don't integrate it. And if you don't integrate it, you repeat it. Fake depth says, look at how much I know about myself. Real depth asks, how do I treat people when I'm triggered? Fake depth says, here's my boundary. Real depth says, I'm terrified to say this, but if I don't, I betray myself. There is no depth without risk. And in a culture that rewards performance over truth, risk is the first thing we avoid. So we keep consuming instead of confronting, and we wonder why all this wisdom still leaves us empty. You're not crazy. You're just hungry for something real. And realness, that starts when you give up the performance. This might surprise you. The demographic most drawn to fake depth isn't who you think. It's not the overly spiritual. It's not the new age influencer. It's men, specifically men in pain. Because most men were never taught the language of introspection. They were taught to do, achieve, perform, but not to slow down, not to feel, not to untangle their story. So when a man finally reaches for help, he reaches blindly. And what he finds first is what's loudest. He finds wisdom in quotes, power in detachment, masculinity in buzzwords. He is told, you're not obligated to explain yourself. Protect your energy. Don't chase attract. And it feels good. It gives him a frame, an identity, a way to narrate his pain. But that narrative quickly becomes a cage. Because these surface level truths don't demand anything from him. They don't require accountability, they don't require rupture, or responsibility, or rebuilding. They give him permission to stay stuck as long as he sounds evolved. Here's the real danger: most men weren't taught to confront their wounds. They were taught to fix them, or ignore them, or dominate them. So when fake depth offers a version of healing that doesn't threaten their ego, it becomes irresistible. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But fake depth says, you're already conscious. Just look at how much you know. That's not consciousness. That's compensation. Real self-work for men often begins in crisis, a breakup, a layoff, a betrayal, a silence too long to ignore. And in that fragile window, what he consumes matters. If all he hears is surface-level comfort, he will mistake stillness for peace, numbness for healing, and language for change. He will think, I don't need therapy. I've read enough. I don't need to feel this. I just need to detach. I'm not afraid. I'm just protecting my peace. But peace that protects you from feeling isn't peace. It's paralysis. So why are men especially vulnerable? Because they were never shown what depth feels like, only what it sounds like. And in the absence of felt experience, they cling to performance. But no quote will save you from what you haven't faced. No aesthetic will replace initiation. No identity will hold you when your world breaks. Only truth will. And truth, it doesn't trend. There's a strange power in words, and an even stranger illusion in them. Because when you say the right things, people assume you are those things. Say the word trauma enough and people think you're healing. Say boundaries enough and people think you have them. Say self-worth enough and people think you feel it. But repeating language is not the same as living it. In the age of fake depth, men have learned the script. That's a trauma response. This is part of my healing journey. I'm choosing not to engage. But underneath, they're anxious, they're lonely, they're angry, they're numb. Because language without embodiment is just performance. Carl Jung believed transformation comes not through intellect, but through integration, through feeling the chaos sitting in it and letting it reform who you are. But embodiment requires what performance avoids: slowness, stillness, suffering. Surrender. Performance is clean, embodiment is messy. Performance says, here's what I've learned. Embodiment says, here's how I'm failing through it. And the body doesn't lie. You can say, I've let go, but if your jaw is clenched and your fists are tight, the body says otherwise. You can say, I'm not afraid, but if your chest is heavy and your voice trembles, the body knows better. Fake depth exists in the head, real depth lives in the body. And we've become so disembodied as men, so disconnected from the wisdom of our sensations, our reactions, our nervous system, that we mistake articulation for maturity. But knowing the words is not knowing the work, and a man can quote Jung, Gabor Mate, and Marcus Aurelius, while still abandoning himself daily. Because unless you embody what you say, you'll end up performing healing while living in dysfunction. And that's the great betrayal we've learned how to sound deep without ever dropping in. You want to go deeper, then don't ask what you know. Ask what you practice when no one's watching. Ask how you respond when triggered. Ask what your body's holding that your words are hiding. Real depth doesn't speak, it moves. Here's the paradox no one warns you about. Once you start awakening, once you read enough, reflect enough, go deep enough, there comes a point where the very act of learning becomes the new hiding place. We stop living and start analyzing. We stop feeling and start framing. We stop crying and start quoting. And just like that, our trauma becomes a dissertation. Our suffering becomes a spreadsheet. Our heartbreak becomes a hashtag. Because now we know. We understand attachment styles, father wounds, emotional neglect, avoidant tendencies, the shadow, the anima, the ego, the persona. But we don't know how to love. We don't know how to stay, or hold, or fall apart, or come back. Why? Because somewhere along the way, insight became the drug. We became addicted to analysis, to mapping, to mastering. Carl Jung warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But in the age of fake depth, we imagine light beautifully, we write about it, post about it, preach about it, but we never enter the cave. Real growth is not intellectual, it's existential. And that's what terrifies people, because to grow you must leave something behind. Not just beliefs, but identities, certainties, ideals you clung to for safety. When you awaken only to protect your ego with more knowledge, you haven't awakened, you've upgraded your defense mechanism. A man who's learned too much too fast without integration becomes dangerous to himself. He uses wisdom as a weapon. He uses theory to dismiss feeling. He builds a fortress of abstraction. And no one can reach him, not even his own heart. He says, I know what this is. This is just a projection. This is a trauma response. But he forgets that even if he's right, he's still hurting. Truth isn't just a description, it's a doorway. And if you're not walking through it, you're just loitering at its edge. So if you're lost in the sea of books, podcasts, threads, therapists, theories, pause and ask, what is one thing I'm avoiding doing because I keep learning about it instead? Real transformation begins the moment you stop seeking more insight and start honoring the truth you already carry. And sometimes that truth sounds nothing like a quote. It sounds like your own scream, or your silence, or the sound of your breath returning. Not all light heals, some blinds. In the new culture of spiritualized content where every quote is about vibrations, letting go, and moving on, we've built a castle of light that refuses to acknowledge the basement. This is called spiritual bypassing, a term first coined by John Wellwood. It describes the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. And it's rampant. Instead of confronting guilt, we recite affirmations. Instead of sitting in grief, we skip to forgiveness. Instead of admitting rage, we call it a misalignment of energy. We do everything except feel the thing. Why? Because real emotions are raw. They're ugly. They don't photograph well. They don't earn you likes. And so we perform light. We project positivity. We quote Rumi without understanding his agony. We use concepts like detachment to avoid accountability. Nietzsche warned us, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. But in this age, we're not becoming monsters. We're becoming mirrors of fake peace. Carl Jung said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what spiritual bypassing is, a beautiful escape from the unbearable honesty of self. But here's the cost. When you use light to hide your shadow, it doesn't disappear, it grows in silence. It festers, it leaks, it infects your relationships, your choices, your reactions. And most dangerously, it convinces you that you're awake when you're still asleep. True spiritual growth doesn't skip steps. It's not a straight line up. It's a spiral downward into the muck, into your unmet needs, and into your abandoned self. Only when you sit with what you'd rather escape can you emerge into earned peace. because not all peace is real. Some peace is just avoidance with better lighting. You want true light, then honor the darkness it was born from. Otherwise, you're not transcending, you're just pretending. We now live in a world where what looks deep spreads faster than what is deep. In a culture addicted to dopamine and speed depth doesn't survive unless it wears a costume. And that costume is click-worthy trauma, digestible pain, branded introspection. Fake depth is the new influencer economy. It's someone sharing a photo of themselves crying right after staging the angle. It's 30-second videos explaining Carl Jung's shadow work with lo-fi beats and no integration. It's trauma turned into aesthetic with candlelight tattoos and filtered tears. And the algorithm loves it because the algorithm is not interested in your healing. It's interested in your attention. So it feeds you bite-sized pain with smooth transitions, digestible suffering with music that makes it feel beautiful, people who open up not to be vulnerable but to be seen. And you don't even realize what's happening. You begin to mistake performance for process, exposure for depth, confession for transformation. The scariest thing, you start mimicking it. You start curating your own healing story to fit the format. You speak in trauma-informed language not because you're embodied, but because it helps you connect quickly, virally, effortlessly. You become a brand. Your pain becomes content. Your image becomes more real than your reflection. And slowly, quietly, insidiously, you forget what real healing looks like. Because real healing, it's slow, it's quiet, it's deeply unmarketable. It doesn't get views, it doesn't trend. Fake depth, on the other hand, sells the image of awakening without the cost of awakening. And that's the ultimate trick. You don't just get seduced by the algorithm, you become it. But here's the truth. What the algorithm rewards your soul often rejects. Because it knows when you're faking it. It knows when the transformation is cosmetic. So ask yourself, is the way I'm healing making me known or making me whole? Because only one of those paths will take you home. There's a new archetype rising in the age of social self-help, the unhealed healer. He's the man who bleeds publicly, eloquently, constantly. He shares his journey of pain, but he's still in the middle of it. He teaches about healing, but hasn't sat in silence with his own rage. He offers insight, but cannot hold contradiction. And the tragedy isn't just personal, it's collective. Because when we follow someone who hasn't integrated their own wounds, we adopt their unfinished business. Their unresolved pain becomes our template for growth. Their blind spots become our beliefs. And here's what most won't admit. The desire to teach before you're ready is often the shadow's way of avoiding its own work. Carl Jung would call this projection turning your unresolved pain into someone else's curriculum. You teach so you don't have to face. You explain so you don't have to embody. Because there's a thrill in being the one who knows. It distracts you from being the one who hurts. But truth isn't taught, truth is lived. And no matter how much you say, no matter how articulate you become, if your nervous system hasn't caught up with your language, people feel it. You don't heal others by telling your story. You heal others by becoming the person your story needed. And if your audience is clapping while you're still collapsing inside, it's not validation, it's misalignment. So before you teach, pause. Before you coach, retreat. Before you share, integrate. Because the world doesn't need another wounded teacher. It needs whole humans who have the courage to not perform their pain. Be the one who heals in private, so that when you speak, your words aren't just echoes, they're anchors. Too much awareness without direction can destroy movement. This is paralysis by awareness, a state where you know everything about your trauma, your ego, your attachment style, and yet you're stuck. You've mapped every wound, you've named every trigger, you've dissected every relationship, but you haven't moved. Carl Jung warned that mere introspection isn't transformation. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But what if instead of making the darkness conscious, we're just circling it, analyzing it, diagnosing it, performing it? Reflection becomes a loop. You look inward so much you forget to step outward. You trade living for labeling. You become your diagnosis. Your self-understanding becomes a self-definition. And here's the kicker. The more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to fall into this, because your mind will give you 100 reasons why you're not ready, why healing is complex, why clarity is elusive. And all of it is true, but none of it helps, because transformation is not intellectual, it's behavioral. It's not what you understand, it's what you choose. So if you find yourself stuck in the mirror maze of reflection, ask, What am I avoiding by endlessly understanding myself? Because sometimes thinking about the wound is safer than feeling it. And sometimes feeling it is still not as powerful as acting beyond it. Healing begins the moment you stop studying yourself and start living differently. Because you don't need another breakthrough, you need a follow through. There was a time when wisdom wasn't found in sound bites. It was passed down from voice to ear, from firelight to firelight. You didn't consume depth, you sat at its feet. But in this digital age, the elder has gone silent, and in his place, the algorithm. The algorithm doesn't mentor. It manipulates, it doesn't guide, it guesses. And we, especially men longing for direction, have begun confusing influence with initiation. The modern man listens to many voices but is fathered by none. Carl Jung said we don't become whole by bypassing the father archetype. But today, most men are raised by TikTok and podcasts. Their spiritual teachers are strangers. Their rituals are morning routines. Their tribes are comment sections. There's no longer a sacred fire to sit around, just LED screens and wireless earbuds. And yet we ache for initiation. So we latch onto influencers hoping their authority will become our identity. We copy their routines. We quote their mantras. We wear their philosophies. But imitation is not inheritance. And the algorithm doesn't know your soul. Real mentorship isn't viral. It's visceral. It comes from a man who has bled failed, gotten back up, and has nothing to prove. He doesn't give you steps. He gives you silence when you want noise. He gives you questions when you crave answers. He gives you mirrors when you want masks. And in that sacred tension you grow. So if you're tired of being shaped by algorithms, find a living elder. Not a perfect man, a present one. Because your healing doesn't need another coach. It needs a witness. And the deepest guidance you'll ever receive won't come through a screen. It will come through a gaze that's lived through what you fear. That's the gaze that blesses. That's the gaze that bursts men. If you've made it this far, chances are you're already not like the rest. You've seen the cracks behind the content. You've tasted the hollowness of insight without embodiment. You're done chasing coaches who never knew your name. So what now? Here's the truth. Depth is not something you learn. It's something you earn. It's what you gain when you stay in the room with your pain instead of posting about it. It's what you become when you dare to live unseen until your transformation makes noise louder than your voice ever could. And the only way out, it's not up, it's down. Deeper, into your shadow, into your body, into your silence. Because real healing doesn't come with views. It comes with voids and the courage to walk through them alone. You want to be free. Stop trying to be wise. Start trying to be whole. Not eloquent, not aesthetic, but real, messy, ugly, honest. Because the man who embraces the parts of him that no one applauds is the man who finally doesn't need applause. So I leave you with this. When you no longer need validation, you begin to carry value. And when you stop searching for answers, you become the kind of silence that terrifies superficial people. Let the fake depths drown in their own shallowness. You were never meant to sip wisdom from memes. You were meant to bleed for it. Now the choice is yours. Scroll another reel or go become the man they can't manipulate. If this pierced something in you, don't let it vanish. Comment below, I choose depth. Let this be the moment you stop pretending. Share this with the friend who talks like a monk but suffers like a child. And if you're done with fake depth and want more content that respects your pain and your power, subscribe. This is the firelight your father never gave you. Welcome home. You're not broken, you're just no longer asleep.